Program where we get to listen to some excellent speeches. So let's get to the very first one. I want to introduce to you our first speaker is Andrew Arrow. Andrew is going to give his third speech in the Competent Communicators Manual. And the purpose of that speech is to get to the point. He's going to do that for us. And the subject is going to be how your bank website works. And I don't know about you, but I'm really anxious to learn about this. Very interesting. Andrew Arrow.
How many people here have logged into your bank's website? You enter your username, you enter your password, and then a few seconds later you see your balance. Today I'm going to explain how that works. Now, to talk about computers, it helps a lot to use anthropomorphism, which is a very big word. It's very hard to say, and it really should have been the word of the day, but it's not. Anthropomorphism means assigning human characteristics to non-human things. So I'd like everyone to picture a man named Doug. And Doug's a very serious guy. He's got on a button-down shirt, and he's sitting at a drafting table. A drafting table is what an architect sits at. It's a table at a 45-degree angle. And on that table is a huge sheet of paper. And Doug, and only Doug, is allowed to write information down on that paper, and he's allowed to read information off that paper. There are some rules, though. He can't just start writing information everywhere. He insists on a little structure before we begin. So we have to tell him how to organize things before he starts writing down on his paper. And so for our bank, what we want is a series of rows and columns. So Doug takes out his ruler, and he has a really nice mechanical pencil, and he starts drawing lines. He draws perfect horizontal lines on the paper. And he draws 10 of these. And then we need rows and columns, so he draws vertical lines as well. He draws 3 vertical lines. And hopefully you can picture that in your mind. This very serious guy sitting at a table drawing those lines on this nice perfect sheet of paper. And at the top of these columns, he labels them. He writes the first one, username, and the second one, password, and the third one, balance. And he said that we had 10 rows there. And that'll work, but that would mean that this bank is limited to just 10 customers. If you're a Bank of America customer, you're probably used to such amazing customer service, it might feel like there's only 10 customers at your bank. But in fact, they actually have millions of customers. So we're going to need some more rows. So I want you to picture this table, this sheet of paper actually is on rollers. So at the top of the table, there's a huge ream of paper that Doug can roll up, and same at the bottom, Doug can roll down. So we made those 10 lines, but he's going to keep going. He's going to make the 11th line, the 12th line, and when he gets down to the sheet of paper, he's going to roll the paper up. So he's able to keep the paper going up and make more and more rows, and he's going to make 1,000,000 rows. And once he gets down at the bottom, he needs to slide the paper back up, so he uses the roll at the top. So he has the ability to go up and down, have this amazing room of paper to write on. So now we have our 1,000,000 rows, and now, Sherry, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, when Doug's not looking, you're going to find your username, and you're going to go over where it says balance, and you're going to add $1,000 to your balance.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to do that, because Doug is never going to take a break. Doug is never going to, go get lunch. Doug is actually not a human. Doug is a database. And if you were to try to go into the bank and sneak there and actually write where Doug writes, you'd be in big, big trouble. So now I want you to picture someone else. I want you to picture a woman named Wendy. Wendy is also very serious, but she's dressed professional, and she's not alone in a room sitting at, a drafting table. She's out in the open at a very pleasant desk when you first walk into the bank. And when you walk in, she has a big smile on her face, and she says, "What's your username and password?" And you tell her your username and password. And then you see her make a phone call to Doug. And she tells Doug your username and password, and then Doug tells her your balance, and then she tells you your balance. So then maybe you tell Wendy, "I have this electricity bill. I need to pay them $50. Would you please go ahead and send $50 to the electricity company?" This is a bill pay service that they offer. And she does this, and she makes another phone call to Doug. And this time you see Doug take out his mechanical pencil, and he erases your balance. And he writes down a new number there that's $50 less. And now, Eugene, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you're going to try to maybe sweet talk Wendy next time you ask her to pay your bill. and say, you know, maybe just pay the bill, but don't call Doug. I don't want that $50 taken out of the balance. I'd rather just have the check paid. Well, sorry, that's not going to work either, because Wendy is also not a human. Wendy is a web server. And Wendy is only going to do exactly what she's been instructed to do. So let's walk through a real example. Let's say our username is John Smith, and let's say our password is Toastmasters. By the way, that is a terrible password. Don't anyone make your password Toastmasters. Too easy to guess. And let's say that you type in your username and password. And how many people here have ever accidentally mistyped your password or mistyped your username? Oh, so you're experienced that you get an error message back. You get something saying, sorry, we have no record of that. So what happens in that scenario? Well, let's say our username is John Smith and we mistyped it. We typed John Smith. We have a little typo there. So Wendy calls Doug and says, I need the balance for John Smith. And so Doug goes to row 1 and looks and says, is this username John Smith? And it's not. He goes down to row 2 and says, is this username John Smith? And it's not. And he keeps going down and down and down and down. Is this John Smith? Is this John Smith? Is this John Smith? And he goes all the way down to 1,000,000 rows. And when he's finally done with that 1,000,000 row, he tells Wendy, he says, hey, look, I went through every single row. I went through all 1,000,000 rows. There is not a John Smith here. And then Wendy says, sorry, can't find your password. So that's what's happening in that second when you mistype your password. And that's why anthropomorphism is so much fun, because you get to give emotions to Doug, as if he's upset that he had to look through all 1,000,000 rows. In reality, Doug is not actually upset. But, so let's say that we actually type our password correct this time. Let's say that we actually do type John Smith, we type our password, and Doug starts looking at row 1, he goes all the way down, he finally finds it, and he finds it at row 900,354. Found it all the way down at the bottom. And if you imagine one of us trying to do that million row search, it would take us days and weeks to actually go through all 1,000,000 rows looking at them, and we would be error prone because we're humans, we wouldn't do it right. Doug can do it, but it's going to take a little bit longer than what we would expect. It would probably take him 5 to 10 minutes to go through all 1,000,000 rows. How many would be happy if when you log your website, it took 5 to 10 minutes before you saw your balance? Would anyone be happy with that? Yeah, we expect it to happen instantly. We expect it, almost less than a second. And so, all of us in this room already know the solution to this problem, because we've all used an index. If you've ever opened a textbook and you've looked in the back of the book, you've been able to find the information you want very quickly. You've been able to look at the index, it's in alphabetical order, you go to what you want, and then it gives you a page number, and then you go directly to that page number. Well, what happens if you didn't have that index, and you still needed to find that information? Well, you would do what we just walked through with Doug. You would take the book, and you would start at page 1, and you would look for your information, and you go to page 2, and page 3, and page 4, and you look through the entire thing, and then you'd find your thing almost on the last page, and it would take a long time. But with the index, it saves time. You're able to look in the index through alphabetical order, and then jump directly to that page. So now what I want you to do is picture in your mind Doug back in his room with his drafting table, and imagine that he's on a swivel chair. And imagine that he just kind of like swivels over, and he has a whole nother sheet of paper, a whole nother drafting table. And what he does on this sheet of paper is he writes out every single username, but he writes them out in alphabetical order. And he writes out the A's first, and then the B's, and then the C's, and he gets all the way down to the Z's, and after every one of them, he has the row number corresponding back in the first one. And so now, what has he done? He's given himself the same thing that you all have with a textbook, the ability to be able to zoom right back over. And so, in this real example, he types in John Smith, he looks up John Smith in the index, and he looks at it very quickly, because he goes right to the J section. And in the J section, it says row 900,254, and then he swivels back, and he goes to that exact row, and that's how he's able to pull your balance up in less than a second. So now you can impress all your friends and tell them that you are experts in web servers, in databases, in indexes. And just leave out the part about Doug and Wendy. Hopefully next time you log into your bank, you will remember the roles of Doug and Wendy. And please, please stop trying to game the system and change your balance. Mr. Toastmaster.
Well, I'm anxious to meet Doug and Wendy. Let's make sure we allow for that. Let's allow right now some time to put to be done.